Hello, folks. It's that time of year again. Halloween is at our doorsteps, and so are those odd and eerie experiences sent to me by our listeners. So, as the trick and treating begins to wind on down and the candles begin to flicker out, here's a few spooky stories to keep you up and alert deep into the night. So, here you go. Story 1. If I didn't believe in cursed objects before, I sure as hell did after what occurred to me after visiting Glass Mountain near the Medicine Lake volcano inside the Shasta National Forest in California. In 2016, I visited this site for the first time and was blown away by the beauty of it. Glass Mountain is a spectacular, nearly treeless, steep-sided mound of obsidian flow that erupted around 1,000 years ago. If you've never seen obsidian, Google it. Obsidian is described as a natural occurring volcanic glass that is formed when lava cools rapidly with minimal crystal growth. It is hard, brittle, and amorphous. It is also known for its razor-sharp properties and was used by many indigenous groups for hunting and battle. Obsidian is also thought to possess powerful energy and is believed to awaken the internal potential of anyone who wears or carries it. Well, before leaving Glass Mountain, I decided to take home a souvenir, a 30-pound piece of it. I didn't know it at the time, but it was strictly prohibited. But I couldn't resist either way. An hour later, I arrived back at home in the valley. Little did I know a string of really strange things would occur in the days to follow. It all began when I attempted to remove the chunk of stone from the back of my van. The heavy piece of obsidian slipped from my grip and opened up the palm of my right hand like Swiss cheese. The incredible pain I felt was followed by a rush of blood and a trip to my bathroom cabinet. I must have used a whole pack of gauze and bandages to stop the bleeding, but eventually I was able to glove it up and get it inside the house, where it would be proudly displayed as a centerpiece on my living room coffee table. Well, that same evening, I had company over. My coworkers, Shelley and Dave, were impressed by the new addition. That was until they became violently ill after touching it. It came on suddenly and without warning. I ate and drank the same things they did, as well as some of my other guests, but we weren't affected. Turns out Shelley and Dave were the only two at the party that actually touched it that night. They were fine once they left, but it sure left a weird taste in their mouths. The following night, I was awoken from a deep sleep by the sound of cracking wood somewhere in the house. When I entered the living room, I noticed that the obsidian had somehow rolled onto the floor, while the wooden coffee table had folded into itself. I can't explain how this happened, as the coffee table was solid oak and sturdy, but somehow 2 of her legs had broken and buckled. Well, maybe 30 pounds was just too much for it, even though I knew it wasn't. But it was on the following day that I began to put 2 and 2 together. I was out digging in the garden when I saw the front door swing wide open. As I stood there processing the strangeness, I noticed a shadowy figure dart by my kitchen window, as I had a clear view inside, and I was the only one home at the time. I actually ended up calling the police to report a trespasser, but deep down inside I knew it was something else. Whatever it was never left that home, as I kept watch until the police arrived. They did a thorough search of the three-bedroom house, and the only odd thing they ever found was that my obsidian rock had again rolled from its new spot, 3 feet from the fireplace. It all made sense now. All the strange activity began when I brought it home. This stone was, dare I say, cursed. So I did what I should have done from the get-go. I returned it to exactly where I found it, and from there on, no more strangeness. I'm left speechless by my experiences, but also a believer in cursed objects. Thank you for sharing my story. Matt. Story 2. I live near the edge of town, just outside of Burlington, Vermont, and next to a large parcel of undeveloped land that is jam-packed full of woodland. There is a trail that goes in and out. It's a short one-way trail, about a half a mile or so. And at least once a week I take my dog for a walk into those woods. Well, earlier this month, that's just what I did. That morning, the weather was cool and crisp with a slight breeze that kicked up from the north, reminding me that winter was on its way. Well, about a fourth of a mile in, a river of fog rolled in out of nowhere and covered us like a blanket. Things went from clear to having absolutely no visibility within seconds. We don't see much fog out here, so this got my attention. You could barely make out the shape of the trees, as they too were swallowed up by it. And then it dawned on me that I could no longer see or feel the trail ahead of me. I first noticed this when I tripped over a stone and landed in some brush. As I got back on my feet, a loud cracking sound emanated from those trees around me, breaking an otherwise peaceful silence. We weren't alone out there. Something was there with us in that fog. My dog's lips peeled back to reveal a snarling set of teeth, followed by a nervous whine and whimper of sorts, which she rarely ever made. I remember feeling the earth around me, desperately searching for a stone or anything I could defend myself with if I had to. And as I did, I noticed an outline of a figure running on 4 legs in a circular pattern. And as it did so, it made an eerie, coy sound, like it was calling a buddy to join it. It was a call I was unfamiliar with, and it sounded more like man than beast, or almost a blending of the two. Well, let me tell you, it sure as hell gave me the bumps. My dog watched it nervously as well, following this thing with its snout like that of a malfunctioning compass. I knew we were in some kind of danger, so I scooped up my baby girl and flung her over my shoulders, before vigorously climbing up the nearest tree. I'm not sure how I did it, but I managed to put about 15 to 20 feet between us and the layer of fog on the ground. But the whole time up, I could hear that cawing sound that creature was making, and it was moving until it reached the base of our tree. Even from where we were, we still couldn't see it from above. It must have positioned itself flat on the earth as to remain invisible. It was using the fog as cover, that much was obvious. I stayed up in that tree for 30 minutes, trying not to drop my wiggling dog, who was squirming in my arms, just as upset as I was. She never stopped growling up there, and that thing never moved a muscle. So you can imagine my surprise when the fog eventually moved on, only to reveal an empty patch of earth, where we were sure it had been, eagerly waiting for our descent. Once the fog had cleared, and we felt it was safe enough to climb down, we did. From there I realized how far we'd gotten off the trail, but eventually found our way back out. It was an experience that changed everything for me. I don't know what I encountered out there in those woods on that foggy morning, but all I know is it wasn't normal for me or my dog. I'm just grateful that we were able to make it out all right, as things could have been much, much worse. Be careful out there in the fog, folks. Thank you for sharing my experience. Curtis and Pepper. Story 3. One morning several years ago, I awoke to find my country home surrounded by wildlife. It was like a scene from a Disney movie, but instead of facing me in my home, their attention was fixated toward the trees that surrounded my property. And there were all kinds of them, such as birds, beavers, skunks, raccoons, deer, and even a bobcat. They all stood there nervously, as if awaiting some kind of event to occur. Living in the remote reaches of Washington State, I have never observed such a sight before until now. Of course, I strolled out onto my deck for a better look at whatever they might be staring at. I didn't see anything, at first anyway. I knew that this was nothing short of strange when my presence on that creaky old wooden deck hadn't even frightened them. This told me that I was not much of a threat compared to whatever might be lurking out in those woods. About that time, I noticed an eerie silence fall over the property, followed by a warm breeze that seemed to flow out from those woods. A warm breeze on a cold autumn morning. And then I saw what those animals were seeing. Several fuzzy, distorted bubbles of whatever appeared at random places in the trees, and they were all moving in a diagonal pattern. It was like they were trading places with one another. If I didn't know any better, I was looking at some sort of intelligence, and the way they just seemed to coordinate in a grid-like pattern confirmed this idea. Again, despite my presence being there on that deck, not more than 40 feet away from most of these animals, they were more concerned about those little pockets of distortion, dancing as if putting on some kind of show. The smallest ones were probably about the size of a pumpkin. The others, though, were around the size of a grizzly bear. This little display went on for about a half a minute or so, and then they just faded into nothing, becoming one with the forest again. And just like that, those animals scattered back into those trees, as if given permission to do so. I must have sat there on that deck all morning, watching those woods, expecting those things to pop out again. At that point, I was a bit paranoid, and every leaf that moved garnered my attention. I can't explain what occurred on that strange autumn morning, but I'd like to see if anyone else out there had this happen to them on their property as well. Thank you, Gail. Story 4. I first saw him while patrolling a lonely stretch of the Centennial Scenic Byway just inside the Shoshone National Forest in Wyoming. The tall, sharply dressed man, clad in black, walked on the side of the road, standing out from the natural environment that surrounded him for miles and miles. And when I passed him up, I saw a face that offered no recognition. His shoulder-length, jet-black hair sat perfectly as he walked in long strides in a cool, calm, and confident manner. There's nothing but hostile terrain and wilderness for miles. Well, the man must have broken down or something, but I didn't see any cars. So I decided to pull onto the shoulder in front of him to see if the guy needed assistance. but I did so hesitantly, as I knew there was something off about him. As I left my vehicle, and I watched him get closer, I realized just how pale he looked. He was clean-shaven, with a long face and a square jaw. He stood about a foot taller than me, and I'm about 5'9". Well, when he was in talking distance, I asked him what in the heck he was doing all the way out here by himself. He stopped walking and smirked. It was a menacing, somewhat sinister kind of smirk, and after I repeated the question, that smirk never left his face. Despite the heat of that sunny afternoon, I felt a shiver run down my back. We locked eyes for a long minute, and as I stood there, contemplating on what to do next, I felt my sinuses drain and the taste of iron in my mouth. As I wiped my face with the back of my hand, I realized that I had a nosebleed. That's when I gazed back up to the stranger and saw that his smirk had widened, like he was enjoying the sight of me bleeding. That's when I slowly backed off and returned to my patrol vehicle. Locking the doors, I retrieved some gauze from the medkit and tended to the bleeding, almost forgetting that the man was still there. I couldn't explain the feeling I was getting from him, but my gut told me to hit the road, something I probably wouldn't have done in any normal situation. You can imagine the relief that washed over me as I watched the stranger disappear in my rear-view mirror. Now what happened next changed everything for me. About a mile or two later, he reappeared on that road right in front of me, causing me to slam on my brakes. As I screeched to a halt, I saw him walk casually to the rear of the car and into a blind spot. Immediately, I exited the vehicle, drew my firearm, and was ready to make an arrest. But I couldn't see him anywhere. After looking under and around the car, I glanced at a group of trees about 100 yards away, too far from anyone to get from here to there in that short amount of time. Again, I couldn't see anything. The stranger had vanished into thin air. After I radioed in my situation to my fellow officers and to dispatch, I felt that eerie feeling again crawl over me on the side of that road. At this point, I didn't waste any time, as I made a U-turn at about 50 and gunned it all the way back to the station, my eyes really never leaving the rear views. There was something evil about the drifter. How could a man disappear like that, then reappear miles ahead of me on a straightaway with no other cars in the middle of nowhere? This fella was evil, and I felt it. Of course, I left this little detail out when filing a report for fear of ridicule, but to know that drifter is still out there walking that road somewhere always puts me on guard. As far as I know, there were no other reports or sightings of the man, as a part of me wishes someone else would have seen him as well, and I wouldn't be alone in my experience. But whomever he was, or whatever he was doing out there, I just pray that we never meet again. Sincerely, Officer Sanchez. Story 5. Hi there, Rusty, and happy Halloween to ya. Well, here's an odd and interesting experience that I had last November while traveling through the long and lonesome roads of Wyoming. I was headed home to Nevada and stopped to rest up at the Happy Jack Recreation Area along the I-80 just outside of Laramie. The site offers great views of the surrounding landscape with lots of trees, mountains, and streams. If you've ever visited the area, you'll know just how stunning the little pit stop is, and up until that cold and windy evening, It was one of my favorite pit stops along the way while traveling through that part of the country. Now, what exactly happened to change the way I feel about it? Well, it all began when I pulled into the roundabout parking area, just in front of a pair of restrooms. The sun barely sat on the horizon, as the cool autumn breeze sent a kind reminder of the approaching winter season. I returned to my Prius and reclined the seat back to rest my eyes a bit before continuing the 3-hour journey that still lay ahead. There were a few others doing the same thing as they came and went. And not long after, I found myself asleep. I wasn't sure how long I'd been out for before suddenly being jolted awake by a slapping sound on the other side of the driver's side window. It was now pitch black outside, and the dim restroom lighting was barely visible from where I sat, casting an eerie orange glow on the now completely vacant parking lot. I was alone out there, but that sound replayed itself in my thoughts as I struggled to find my keys. But this proved useless, as I was unable to see anything in that darkness. So I felt my way around the center console, passenger's seat, or anywhere else I may have misplaced my keys. But still nothing. So I began to pat the car ceiling like a maniac, hoping to activate one of the ceiling lights. And when it popped on, I was both relieved and unnerved by the amount of light which poured into that small space. Relieved because I found my keys sitting on the floor, and unnerved because whomever or whatever was outside my car window could now see me. That's when I peered up to my window and saw a steaming imprint apposed upon that glass, about the size of a pumpkin pie. Something had been parked in front of my window the whole time, just before the light scared it off, or at least I hoped so anyway. Of course, my knee-jerk reaction was to stab the ignition with my keys and try to get out of there. Well, as I put her into reverse, my rear lights picked up something just slightly off to the side of the car, painting it in red. As I tried to determine what exactly it was I was looking at, it sorta leaped out of view and fell backward into the darkness, as if trying not to be seen. Well, just when I thought I'd cleared it, I heard another loud slap on the car as it rocked side to side. Immediately, I turned my head in time to see an image on my driver's side window that still haunts me to this day. Pressed upon that glass was the snarling, hellish face of a creature straight out of a nightmare. The glass squeaked and smeared as a saliva-like mucus juiced out of its needle-like teeth, biting hard and fast onto the thin glass that now separated me from a most gruesome attack. The sight was so unreal that I almost became lost in the disbelief that surrounded me in that tiny car. I don't remember much in the moments following that unruly encounter, but I found myself doing 110 on the I-80, determined to put as much space between me and the rest stop as possible. The ride home was short, but my thoughts were long as I replayed the incident in my head like a broken record, and that record never really did stop playing. I never did seek counseling for it, but I did find some comfort in connecting with some cryptozoologists to try and find out what this thing was. And as far as I know, we're all still trying to find some answers. So if there's one thing you can take away from my encounter, be very wary of that area at night. Dante. And there you have it. As you know, it doesn't need to be Halloween night for strange things to occur, for they happen more often than we probably realize. Thank you for joining me, and you'll hear from me soon. Good night.